So for anybody who doesn't know her already, you should. Jess Stauth. What is your formal title at this point? Quantopian.
I'm running portfolio management.
Yes, Quantopian's portfolio implementation team running portfolio management and research. For anybody who doesn't know, Quantopian is basically a kind of as estimized as a crowdsourced estimates platform. Quantopian is kind of a crowdsourced quantitative models platform. But more than that, it is a really incredible piece of quantitative infrastructure, which they are now bending more towards their business model, which is awesome. And you should absolutely take a look at it. They also, by the way, have some really incredible educational material on their website for everything from the very basics of quantitative research all the way through, like, what would be the most sophisticated advanced thing?
There's some machine learning.
There's some machine learning stuff up there. It's an amazing free resource. So Jess is going to talk about data modeling robustness, which is obviously super important here. The dangers of overfitting, obviously that is a huge issue within our industry and all these new unique data sets. Just a little bit of Jess's background. She previously worked as an equity quant analyst at StarMine, which is kind of the predecessor to a lot of what we've all done. And as director of quant product strategy for Thomson Reuters, she holds a PhD from UC Berkeley in Biophysics. I actually didn't know that.
Yeah, well known fact.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Okay, wait, it's not fun. I like to wander around. So can you guys hear me? Oh, perfect. All right. So before I get started, can I just do a quick show of hands? Who self-identifies as a quant? Could you raise your hand? Okay, and thank you. Who self-identifies as other than quant, but also sort of in asset management currently? Okay, so that's, all right, we'll see what you, I will try to not be too boring for the quants who won't know this stuff. We'll sort of maybe just be kind of a nice step back and refresher and reminder. So I thought I would talk about sort of like some of the real world pains of going from building a model to trading a model. I went right past a really important disclaimer slide. Oh, whatever. So first I wanted to kind of motivate the talk a little bit. So I'm going to sort of step you through something that if you're a quant, this is probably like a thing you need going back through and thinking about, but it really turns out to be pretty easy to build a beautiful backtest. Like glorious, perfect, straight line up and to the right. And the problem is, right, that that's not what you're paid to do at the end of the day. So I work a lot with folks that are sort of trying to be independent quants, who are trying to build a model and then sell it. But the same is true if you work in a firm, your employer is paying you to build a model that's going to make money, right? Not just sort of looks nice. And that turns out to be extremely challenging. This is what you work on. You're probably pretty aware of that problem. However, it's kind of worth it, right? Because if you actually come up with a model that has some predictive power, I always sort of think about like predictions as being, sort of how much breadth is there, but how much of a forecast power and time is there. So even looking ahead, like if you think of, when HFT sort of first got started, I was sort of one of the people who was always like, it's so boring, just like hardware, it's like not that interesting. The forecast is for like a microsecond ahead or a millisecond ahead or a second ahead. Well, that's extremely valuable, and I think we all saw how powerful it is to have even very, very short-term prediction. Now, if you think about actually making predictions and forecasts that have power going in the future, it's really valuable, right? Okay. So fine, it's hard. I'm telling you, I think it's really, really hard, and you're saying, yeah, that's fine. I love hard work. So what is the problem here? Why is it sort of almost more than just that it's hard in terms of horsepower? So kind of stepping back and thinking about this workflow, right? This is what quants do. So they have an idea. They're like, the smartest person in the room, kind of think that, how to work in this field. Then they go out and they look for data that could sort of support that hypothesis, right? Or sort of prove, is that idea really true? They research, they build a model, they run simulations, and then they get ready to trade real money. So the problem is that you sort of go through each of these steps and you can imagine you're like, do I have a good idea? Yep, I do. Okay, check, yeah. Can I source the data to get that? Now that might be a challenging step, it might be expensive, it might be laborious. You find the data yourself, or you scrape it, or you buy it from a vendor, but you can get it, you kind of know when you have I have the data. Yes, check. Awesome emoji. You know you've done your research. You know you've built your model, right? Like, yes, I know I've done those things. I have done them. You run a simulation. You know you've done it. But is it a future predictor? Is it going to work? And so we don't know, right? You don't know if your model is going to predict the future. And so there's like a couple things we usually do before we just turn our models on and find out. So what we try to do is say, all right, well, let's sort of imagine the future might be something like the past. And we have past data, so let's sort of get in our little time machine, go back in time and run a simulation. And if that works, then I've validated my model, right? It would have worked if I had turned it on 5 years ago. So yeah, okay, awesome. It's going to work. So then this is when you, as the quant, start to sort of second guess yourself and start asking yourself, especially if you've done this a few times, these kind of questions. What if? So what if your simulation is not actually matching that well with reality? So also, you knew you had data, but what if there was something about your data that had a flaw in it, some sort of systematic flaw or bias? What if you just got lucky, right? So there are a lot of what ifs that can happen where you sort of think everything's going just great, and once you get to deploying your model on real money, it's very sad and it doesn't work. So that's what I want to talk about today. I have sort of had the interesting position to get to look at across backtests and simulation results for hundreds of thousands of folks who use our website. And so it's sort of interesting to get to take a step back and say, oh, like these things that have felt painful to me as a quant doing my own work, yet they are common and painful to many others. And you can sort of like look and see these. So I'm going to try to use some real examples for some of these. But these are the 5 that I'm going to run through: overfitting, overtrading, the fact that life markets are not stationary and things change, look-ahead bias, and model complexity. All right, so we talk about overfitting a lot in the Quantopian office, and we also have a joke in the research team that anything you bring up, there's this one guy, Adrian, on my team, who will say, there's an XKCD for that. And so literally anytime I'll like make an observation about the world, it's like XKCD already has a pricing for that, and you should just look that up. So the one that I like in this sort of overfitting cartoon they put out was the House of Cards model, right? So this is basically like the thing that's going to happen to you unless you guard against all of these problems. Is you have your historical data, you fit to it, it looks just great, right? And then suddenly you roll it forward into the future and things go completely haywire. Probably is familiar, maybe. Or maybe you guys don't have these problems. I'll be interested to hear afterwards. People come up and say they've never run into these. So I wanted to pick, there's obviously a million different examples you can sort of think about to talk about what does overfitting mean, right? So just kind of quickly, right? The idea that you can take the data set that you have access to and you can build a model that perfectly matches it. But if you do that, you've probably fit so many parameters that when you take that model and you now feed it new data it hasn't seen before, it's not going to generalize and it's going to give you answers that aren't actually that useful. So your in-sample fit becomes not predictive of your out-of-sample fit. So there was an interesting example that came up on the Quantopian platform that was sort of a new, almost to me, a new failure mode for overfitting. So this is an example from an author that we work with. So we sort of look at people's data exhaust. We find folks on our platform that we think are smart, and we reach out to them and we say, we think you have written a model that might make money. We'd like to license it from you. So this guy, we're talking with him, and he has got a bunch of strategies. He seems to have a lot of free time, which I'm sure his employer would find interesting. And he's got a ton of strategies on the platform, some of which look really good and that we have licensed. Here we looked at 4 different strategies where we said to him, hey, you've got these strategies and they hold very few positions. They're very concentrated, if you would think of it from where a lot of you folks probably come from institutional background. So a fundamental manager might certainly have a portfolio that holds 30 positions or 40 or 100, but quants usually want to hold every single position, right? So there's something called the fundamental law of active management where the idea being if you have predictive power, you have a little bit of predictive power for every bet you make. What you'd like to do is make a lot of bets, and you will actually add up your predictive power. So with this guy, what happened, we sort of have a table here. For each strategy, he had a very concentrated portfolio, 30, 40, 50 names in it. And we said, hey, why don't you take a look? If you expand the size of your portfolio, you might get better diversification. You might see your Sharpe ratio go up. And instead, he saw his Sharpe ratio go down. And so what we sort of were talking about with him and then internally is, hey, that's a bad sign. That's kind of a red flag. So if you think about what happens when you overfit to small portfolios, what can happen is you have an idea and you try it across a broad universe of stocks and it does not work. This is always tough, right? In this iterative cycle of like checking if your ideas are good and then discarding them, it can be really tough to discard ideas. And so you said, well, okay, sure, I have to keep working at this. So it didn't work on all the stocks in, whatever, the MSCI or the Russell 3000 or something, but maybe there's a subset of stocks for which it works. And so what I also see people do on the platform is sort of take their idea and then keep subsetting down the universe until they find a cohort of stocks, sometimes that they statically pick for which their model works, right? So this is a bad sign. So how do you avoid this one? Basically, you're gonna try to not over-optimize your model by looking at a very small number of data points. In this case, I'm talking about assets or stock tickers. So we noticed this was like a really sort of prolific problem or widespread problem on the platform, and so we said, let's try to explain this to people. So I ran a webinar where I said, hey, submit your tear sheets, I will look at them, and in real time I will give you feedback on them. And this was sort of one of the main themes that I highlighted was, you guys are all picking these really small portfolios. If it's under 100 positions, I'm going to just say, I'm flagging it like it's concentrated. And what was interesting was we gave that feedback, and we ran the same session again a couple of months later, and people really listened, which everyone at Quantopian is joking that I'm going to become like a egomaniac or something, that I'll say things and people on the internet will do what I tell them to do, which kind of does seem cool. But people really are able to take this feedback. It's like a thing that's not that hard to say, oh yeah, let me see if my model will work on many, many names. I think it's good hygiene. All right, so I want to keep moving along. So this is probably another one that is familiar to you guys, but what's cool, these are 3 actual real examples from our platform. So these are 3 algos where in blue, I'm showing you what the backtest looks like. And I can't actually remember. Some of this data I think might be live data, some of it is backtest. So in blue is what it looks like if you don't pay to trade. That's great, actually, turns out. And in orange is what it looks like if you do pay to trade. And of course, there's like a lot of different complexity that can go into modeling. What is your cost, right? So your costs are like really easy to forecast things, like what the commissions are that you pay, and they're very, very difficult to model things like what impact you have in the market. But what you can see is for these 3 different algos, there's a really different penalty function. I'm applying the same cost function across these 3 algos. So in one sense, you'd say like, oh, that's weird, like they should all just get sort of hit, in a similar way. Well, no, because they're doing really different things under the hood, it turns out. So if you develop your algorithm assuming low or no costs, you can really fool yourself into thinking that your returns are going to look better than they really are. So this is low at the bottom. I'll read it, how to avoid this. Just always try to be extra cautious and conservative, right? So if you think you know what your costs are, you're going to want to, add a 50% factor to that or something along those lines. And I'll tell you that, in the case of these 3 examples, the things that we'll see on our platform are like, okay, so why would algo B, for example, be so horrible looking when algo C is not that bad? Algo B probably either makes many, many, many trades per day, so sort of your cost accumulates with basically the number of trades that you're making. So you can do that like 2 ways, and you can do both. You can trade too often, or you can trade too many positions. Usually, it's more on the too often side, but you can trade many, many positions every single day. And if every one of those is like just shy of making you money, you will create, a very predictable money-losing engine. Which, I get asked a lot of times, or especially when I would first talk about people building strategy on their platform. Do you find some that are so predictably negative that you could invert them, license them, and multiply them by -1 and trade them? And I'm like, I hope I will someday. We have not really, there's one right now we're looking at, we almost think it might be like that. But instead, usually when you see someone have like what looks like a predictable money-losing signal, it's usually just the cost. And if you back out the cost, it is now a nice random noise generator. So I have not found that many that actually people have, because people are like working on their ideas, so they're not gonna like keep working on something. You see what I'm saying? They can be smart enough to put the -1 sign in front of it themselves. Okay, so the third one that I want to talk about is regime shift or non-stationarity. So there's a lot of ways to define this, but when you're using time series techniques, and some people like gloss over this, and some people are like live their whole life obsessed on this fact, but when you're using a lot of time series techniques, there can be an assumption baked in that they're stationary. So stationary means that the time series you're looking at has a constant mean and a constant variance. So let's say I just show you a little snippet of a VIX time series, right? You can imagine the mean would be somewhere in here, right? And there's like, you know, some envelope of the standard deviation that's going around it. And so let's say that I just showed you that view of the world. This is what volatility looks like. You don't know what, you know, maybe I like remove the time axis and I just give you that. And so now imagine you've done all of your research, which just sounds crazy, but I'm telling you, yeah, there are people that will be on the platform and they'll say, oh, well, I just wanted to like use a year or two of data. It's not actually like in some senses super crazy. And some data sets that you're using may only come online a couple of years ago, especially if you're trying to be sort of at the vanguard of, you know, taking new data sets that folks have not done a lot of work on. So let's say you build your model over that time period, and then I reveal to you that, oh, there are other time periods where markets are much more volatile. Now, you may not have specifically built a volatility predicting strategy, but if volatility is in any way influencing how your strategy works, and you've sort of looked and built your strategy in a world that's low volatility, you're going to be in for a surprise. So there's no perfect way to avoid this, and it is sort of like one of the sad things about our field, that there's only one, you know, history of what happens in the market. So there's sort of like only one fixed time series. So really kind of the only thing you can do is just be aware of this, try to use as much data as you can without still while trying to hold some data out for validation. But this is what makes, I think, it really tricky to sort of take the common like data science techniques of like train and test set and just blindly apply those to financial markets time series. Because if you look at this time series, it's like, well, gosh, it's so variable and different. What subset of this data should I hold out to validate? The last year or half and half? But there's autocorrelation in the set. So this is sort of the type of thing that makes it a little bit tricky. You want to be thoughtful about how to break up across time and not overfit your model, or not sort of be fooled by the fact that there are non-stationaries in your data. All right, so what did you know? When did you know it? This one always seems like, oh, solved problem. Nobody makes these mistakes anymore. That is not true, and you should constantly be checking. So what are some classic examples of this? This is like such a simple one that I've still seen people do it. I've seen people do it inside of my own firm. You get this like data file, maybe I'm gonna use an example of its price, but it can be anything, right? You get these data files and like the date column is always like some horrific, god-awful other date. I'm not a computer scientist, by the way, so no offense, but I hate these kind of date formats. You're just like, can I just have like the date and the time? Well, no, often you can, or you get like all these microseconds, you don't need them. And you're like, screw this, I just really want to build a daily model. So you know what you did, you just like drop time, right? As soon as you've dropped the timestamp, you now have like one potential problem, especially if you hand that data to somebody else. Well, was that a close price, or was that an open price, or was that the VWAP price? What was it? And when you go to use that time series or that data set later, if you've like forgotten, not labeled it, don't tell somebody else, you can end up building a model that's like, let's say like a daily technical factor that uses today's close price, know that it's morning. That would be awesome. It works super well. This is the same thing that can happen for modeling earnings surprises. I remember one of the first models that I was building at StarMine, I was like, went to my boss, I'm like, oh, I'm so excited. I found this thing that's like got like such a high IC, like I've never seen anything like it. And he's like, yeah, okay, well, that's because you're just using, like, I forget whether I was using quarter end dates or what. And I'm like, yeah, but that's the data's like up to that date. And he's like, you idiot. It takes you like 45 days to find out about that data point, right? So you have to know not only sort of for some data that's like period dependent, right? Obviously you need to know this is the data that covers from this point in time to that point in time. And I'm not going to find out about it for 45 more days or 60 more days. It's not rocket science, but it will get you over and over again. So it's something that I think just people always need to like be vigilant, and especially if you're thinking about, oh, I know my data set, I'm not making this mistake, but it's almost like a chain of custody or something. You have to know like, where did I get this data from, right? So ideally, when you're handing data around, you want, and then it can be horrible, right? So you're like, now we have like 3 date columns, like, but you really want a knowledge date if you can have it. And so that's, people will pay a lot of money for point in time data for just this reason. So but let's say you're like not that sure, you're like, it's kind of like fuzzy. What I like to do is just try to like basically lag everything by a day, or just check, for example, right? So one nice thing you can do is say, hey, if I'm wrong about my sort of time fidelity, and I lag this signal, how quickly does it fall off? So that would never save you probably from if you're off by like 45 days, which again, I did do. But it will save you if you sort of like have this open close price issue. Just try to like push everything back by 1 day. So that's what we would do a lot of the time when we were modeling in StarMine. So the last one, I just sort of have a picture. I don't have any real data, but I would say kind of cool blog where I stole this picture from that really got at this issue that I wanted to talk about, because I think this one's very subtle. So I'm just going to talk about model complexity, but you can see this little figure has sort of put a nice bar chart showing sort of like some other types of problems that we already talked about. So I think there's a very like specific and kind of technical definition for model complexity. I tend to think of it in like a general way, which is as you are making your model more and more complicated in any dimension, so you're adding other factors, or you're being fancy and really smart about like some factors don't work all the time. They work well in these time periods and not so well in those time periods. Like anytime you're being cute and tricky and making your model better, you should also think about it like, this is a risk that I'm taking. I'm making yet another assumption about the world. So it's a chance to improve your model. It's also a chance to be wrong. That's what I like about very, very simple models. It's like very few ways to be both right and wrong, and you can try to really deeply understand, am I right about that assumption? Am I right about that assumption? So the idea was sort of increasing model complexity, and like, I'm not necessarily like have any ideological view on machine learning. I think there's a lot of really good use cases for it, but it's somewhere where you can very easily back into some very high degree of model complexity without fully like having to own that or be explicit about it. So I have got a lot of lovely, very smart millennials that work with me for me, and they're like, oh, you can just like go on and all these tools online now. Just like download Keras, download this, that, the other thing, just drop stuff in and run it. And actually, a colleague of mine, Joe, has a great example of this. So not for his day job, but he built a machine learning model to predict how well he does playing a video game that he plays like apparently all the time, all night. So he's very strange, plays a video game all night. He downloaded this package and he fit a machine learning model to like how well he plays the video game. And he's telling me about it, and he's like, yeah, the only problem I found out, very easy to use Keras, but apparently there's like one part of the video game data set where I didn't have the right units, and so it turned out like all my data points got set to 0 except for this one outlier. And so he like gets this model back, and basically he's like literally set all his data points set to 0, and it took him a really long time to figure this out because he was sort of like, you're so far away from the data once you get a really complicated model. So I preach this like every day, both to the folks that we work with that are external and then to our research team internally, which is every time you think you're being smart, there's an opportunity to actually be stupid. Sort of like a little bit of a glass half empty way of thinking about the world. But I think it's useful. And so I think it can cause you to look at every improvement that you make and really try to convince yourself this is an improvement and it's worth the uncertainty that it could be wrong in some cases. All right, so I think that's everything that I had. I think I gave this talk to a student group last, so I was telling them they should write entries into our contest, but you can also all feel free, certainly, to write entries into our contest. And I think I maybe have a couple minutes for questions. Yeah? Does anyone have any questions? Oh, also, as I was writing these, I realized that Tucker Balch, who's an academic, had written a blog post for us a few years ago that had most of these and more. So I just put a couple of links up there, and he gave a talk on this. It's on YouTube as well. Questions? Does anyone want to disagree with any of these? Never hit one of these? Yeah.
Just on your last point there, is there any way you can give a sense as to how many of the models that you see are actually based upon machine learning?
On Quantopian?
Yeah.
So the question was how many of the models that people are building, that we're evaluating, use machine learning, and can I know about that maybe also? Not that many. We have, I think, some more work to do to make it easier to use machine learning packages. So you can use scikit-learn, and there are definitely some people doing that. Some of the challenges are like we offer this this backtesting and research platform, and it's free and it's hosted on Amazon. What that means, how we've implemented it, is that it's like this big shared resource. So it's not like super well set up for really intense kind of like machine learning compute things. So we've been thinking a lot about like how to make that easier because I think it would be interesting. So we don't have any models that we're training in the market right now where people like out in the wild have written machine learning models. I would say for us, it's still something we're like looking forward to.
So how would you broadly characterize the models that you are training? Your parametric statistical models?
Yeah, absolutely. So when we put the backtesting platform online, so I've been there about 5 years. I think the platform, you could write backtests for maybe a year and a half before that. First data sets that were available were minute R price and volume data. So that's been around for the longest, and it's US equity. So we have a lot of sort of like scatter and reversal style strategies. Then we later brought online fundamental data. So first we had Morningstar data, now actually have FactSet data that's in there that's coming online. So you can kind of see like as you add each new data set, and I'm hoping that next year we'll get a mechanism where we'll start to be faster about that. As you add more data, people will then go and you know, we will do the same workflow I think that professionals do, or well, I'm sure some people won't that they do this, but just like go to SSRM and find like papers that they think are cool. I talked to one guy who claimed he was retired. He claimed he had tried to replicate 400 papers from SSRM on Quantopian in the last year. I think he was retired. It was very difficult to know.
Well, we made some research on the connection between the overfit level of the models and the number of simulations that led to the.
You recall, I didn't talk about that in this presentation.
Yes, it did, but.
What do we see with that?
That was such a research.
Oh, yeah. Yes. So we've looked a little bit at whether, so we have all this data, like all this metadata about people too. And one challenge is we have a very, very small number of algorithms so far that we've allocated capital to and see like they work. So sort of like saying like that metric of saying like, oh, these things are good. So these are the good things, and then who are those people, and what about those people predicted whether they would be good or bad? It's like incredibly imbalanced data set still. I'm hoping that we'll get like better and better. So it looks a little bit like, yeah, maybe like, you know, obviously anecdotally we know that if you run zillions of backtests, you will find something that looks good. It's really been challenging for me to separate that from also a positive predictor of good work is a lot of hard work. So I don't have a great way at my fingertips to sort of separate out these two pools of people, one of whom are like incredibly active on the platform, run a lot of simulations, but practice good data hygiene and sort of hold out their own data. And the other here is like the literal sort of, or not literal, but the figurative monkeys with typewriters. So it's not like super cut and dry. You can find a little bit of results like that in the platform if you look at it. My earlier anecdotal observation that I don't have more data on was that there was a predictive ratio, which was the ratio of like your number of post backtests. So people can post comments in the community to run backtests or algorithms. And I would say early on, like someone would be particularly obnoxious, you'd go look them up. You could be guaranteed data of many more posts than backtests. And the people that I come across whose work is really good, often they've never made one post in the community. That's actually not a great thing, and we're trying to like get people who are really good to sort of be more engaged and talk in the community. Do I have time for one more question? One more question? If there is one. Yeah.
Question. Do you have a sense for like professional versus non-professional on your platform?
On the platform? Well, we have both, and now that we have announced this partnership with FactSet, where there's going to be an enterprise platform, I think there's yet more professionals because I think people hear about that and they sort of come kick the tires. It looks to me like broadly it's like half US, half ex-US, and then sort of or other direction, it's kind of like a little less than half that have like no real specific domain background, and then half that do have something. So they might not be asset management, but they might be with operations or something within that. So some amount of background. Almost everybody either has like a technical background, some type of experience with coding, or that's why they're there, because we don't have anything that's like UI based. So that's the most common thread that I've seen. So I will be around right after this if anyone has other questions, but thank you. Otherwise, thanks for your attention.